slogan is for hardworking people, and I think that's one of the big things that they're going to be talking about this year.
The issues that are being discussed by the party and by the ordinary memberships are immigration, Europe and the economy.
How should the Conservative Party react to UKIP? And the second is, what policy should we go into to the next general election?
This conference is the first one to really be focusing on the next general election. So everyone's looking forward to 2015, working out not only what messages and what policies and what ideas we should be talking about, but crucially, how do we get those across to the general public?
The Conservative Party's annual conference was held in Manchester this year. As with the Labour and Liberal Democrats, an important point of discussion was the economy, with hopes that continuing growth would be the best route to a Conservative victory at the next general election.
George Osborne's speech was very well received yesterday, and it continues his rehabilitation from the budget a couple of years ago, which lacked the sort of detailed work that was necessary. But everyone's very positive. The economy is moving forward.
We now know that the analysis of the party was right and that the coalition did take the right decisions. However, it's not over yet. We can't rush back into high expenditure on all sorts of programs just because we turned the corner. We've got years left before we get to that situation where we can actually say we've solved the problems that were left to us by the last government.
Strategically, the Conservative Party is in the right place, which is to keep on banging the drum that we're now in a recovery, but it's quite a fragile recovery, and if they aren't re-elected, that recovery could be put in jeopardy.
The tone of discussion was set in response to announcements from the Labour Party the previous week, continuing the theme about the cost of living and how party policies could benefit hard-working people.
I think there are some people in the party who feel it will now all fall to them because they can paint Ed Miliband as a socialist offering people the 1970s or the Soviet Union, I heard mentioned at fringes today. And there are other people who think it's going to be a lot more difficult than that, and I think they're probably right.
Ed Miliband has successfully dictated the agenda by announcing the energy price freeze. It highlights the biggest issue, I think, in British politics, at least this week, which is the cost of living crisis.
So it's this idea of not reverting to a core vote strategy, but instead keeping very firmly tilted in the centre ground and concentrate on cost of living issues and quality of life issues.
So we haven't come up with, say, one big cure-all to this problem about cost of living. I think there's lots of different things. So Ian Duncan Smith talking about reforms to welfare, or maybe it's George Osborne, and he made a few announcements yesterday during his speech.
So for the Conservatives, it's all about saying, well, like, look, the best thing we can do to address your cost of living is make sure that housing is affordable, is to make sure that fuel duty doesn't go up, to make sure there are tax incentives, and in this case within the marriage and civil partnerships, which are obviously going to be introduced in the next couple of years.
Firstly, the idea that we need further welfare reform to focus particularly on those people who are trapped in the curse of long-term unemployment. The idea that actually there ought to be further more intensive programmes to help people, but also things to get people used to the workplace again. So George Osborne and Ian Duncan Smith have announced the idea that if you're in long-term unemployment, then you'll actually come to the job centre to be given support and help finding jobs like a normal working week as a 9-to-5 activity. And that's something which I think is a radical departure from what's been done before, and to a lot of people it makes sense.
However, although the debates were deliberately framed in response to the Labour Party, there was a significant amount of discussion on the fringe about how the Conservatives should react to the rising popularity of UKIP.
I think one issue at this conference is whether Nigel Farage can successfully disrupt the conference. He's here, he's written an article for The Times saying that UKIP would be prepared to countenance joint UKIP Conservative candidates in some constituencies. Clearly that's a bid by him to try and grab the headlines. I'm not sure that he'll succeed. I think David Cameron and George Osborne and others have some sufficiently eye-catching announcements to make that that Farage won't succeed in completely disrupting their agenda.
While the media is wanting to make possibly more of the UKIP story because it's an interesting political story, I think those who are sensible and working towards an election victory next time appreciate that that's not the way we have to go.
36% wasn't enough. So they've got to hold on to the people who might go UKIP and attract voters who voted Liberal Democrat, attract voters who voted Labour, win some votes in the cities, win the votes of ethnic minorities and people who work in the public services. And I think the Conservative Party has to realise that it can't always trust what works in the fringe of the activists, and that it's actually still got a job of modernisation to do.
If the party was to veer to the right, it would actually alienate as many people as it would to secure the votes.
One thing was very clear from this conference season, that the race towards the general election is well underway, and that campaigning for an election win in 2015 would mean extending party appeal beyond political activists to the electorate via a coherent and appealing manifesto of policies. And this will be the battleground for all three main political parties.
The mainstream view within the Conservative Party is that the best way to deal with UKIP is just to carry on campaigning, present the best face they can to the electorate and hope that the UKIP vote collapses and that they don't get any more than they did in 2010.
The big question for me is the practicality of how we campaign. So it's interesting that the main conference with all the ministers is talking about policies. The fringe conference, the people who do the campaigning, the think tanks, the pressure groups, the individual grassroots ordinary party members are talking about the actual campaigning machine of the party. And that's a big question. I certainly hope that the party's leadership is listening very closely.
Really seeing off the UKIP threat for David Cameron only puts him on the starting line back to where he was at the last election, and then needing to persuade people that the Conservatives have changed in the way he says they've changed, that they welcome people from all parts of Britain, that they can compete in the north, that they don't stand up for the rich and powerful. So I think it's very hard to make sure you keep enough of the Tory tribe happy enough to back you while still trying to expand your tribe. But I think that's the job of political leadership.